Welcome to the Walk Around Podcast. Our goal is to share with you the insights, the skills, the processes, and the leaders that are influencing the retail automotive landscape today. I'm one of your hosts, Nick Funch, and joined by our guest today, Brent Sergot. Welcome, Brent.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here. A little bit about you. Brent is the Senior Vice President and Assistant General Manager for Southeast Toyota Distributors, the world's largest independent distributor of Toyotas and a subsidiary of Diversified Automotive Corporation, JM Family Enterprises. An associate since 2001, Brent has held many positions within the organization. Most recently, he was Group Vice President of Operations and Assistant General Manager for Southeast Toyota Distributors. Before that, he held leadership roles at sister companies Southeast Toyota Finance and Datascan, including Group Vice President of Southeast Toyota Finance Originations and President of Datascan. Prior to joining JM Family, Sergot was already an established automotive thought leader, having made his mark at various industry organizations focused on wholesale, remarketing, fleet, and retail. In his current role, Brent manages the day-to-day operations of Southeast Toyota, including sales, vehicle processing, field operations, sales planning, incentives, vehicle distribution, parts distribution, strategic planning, and IT. That's a mouthful, Brent. Welcome.
Yeah, geez, what a puff piece that was.
Well,
clearly I didn't have an opportunity to write that. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really cool is you've got a lot of sight lines into a lot of different things: how we retail cars and automotive, how we support the retailers, and how we support the factory. And I think that's really interesting, and love to get to explore that a little bit today. But I think maybe before we get there, how did you get into the automotive space, just quickly?
By accident. I think very few people actually, aspire into the automotive space. And we all end up here because it's a fantastic industry to be in. But, I was born and raised in Minnesota and knew a guy who was in the automotive space, and was on my way to get an advanced degree after graduating from college, and was ready to get out of the cold weather and go explore Southern California for a little while. And this guy talked me into joining a wholesale auction group and moved to Orlando, Florida. Had every intention of, getting out of the industry after a year. I signed a 1-year lease. I deferred my enrollment in advanced degree. And here I am almost 30 years later, still in the industry. It gets in your blood. You can't shake it. And so I spent my time in the beginning in the wholesale auction side of the business, and kind of moved from there into the vehicle remarketing side as well, which always is an interesting aspect of the business, and one that's largely invisible to the consumer, but a big piece of what makes this business unique.
Yeah, I think it does certainly have a way of bringing people in, and there's different things that attract people to it, right? And I think it is a fascinating business, and there's a lot of tentacles that go a lot of different directions. But over that kind of span, which you mentioned, the time frame, a lot of things have changed in automotive and how consumers interact. What are some of the biggest changes I think you've seen over that time period, and certainly more closer to us? We've seen a lot of accelerant there.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most intense change that we've seen is probably coming out of the recession in 08 or 09, and then what we've experienced over the last 8 or 9 months. I think if you go back pre-recession, technology in vehicles, how consumers wanted to engage, all of that was really kind of strategic thinking at the time, not really ready for execution. And I think now, cars are built, they're basically, rolling technology platforms. And the way consumers want to engage is entirely different than they have in the past. And I think the combination of the two has presented opportunities for this industry to really drive this business. And I think, the evolution of the consumer experience at the retail world has been absolutely fascinating to watch. and the demands on transparency around the industry and how we as an industry have evolved in that front is really to meet consumer demands. And I think if you look at that aspect of things on the consumer side of things and their engagement, leading up to this pandemic, digital retail was something that people were playing around with. They were trying different platforms. They were experimenting with it. A handful of dealers were kind of all in on the concept. I think a lot of them were on the fringe, kind of watching to see what would happen. And the consumers really didn't necessarily want to engage in an end-to-end transaction. I think the data at the time said, 3% of consumers actually were kind of hand raisers wanting to buy a car or, research a car, price a car, and go all the way through the transaction online. Fast forward, you hit the pandemic and consumer expectations changed overnight. And dealers had to adapt to the technology. They had to have a consumer-friendly website. They had to be able to, price vehicles remotely. A lot of them had to figure out how to deliver cars remotely, both sales and service. And so the dynamic that has shifted is I don't believe that consumer demand and the demand for the engagement is going to go back to what it was. They're going to want to have these tools available to them going forward. And we saw our teams that support the retail modernization is what we call it. The demand for their services exploded when COVID hit. We went from pre-pandemic, SET has 177 Toyota dealers in our 5 states. Going into the pandemic, we had about 70 dealers or so engaged in some form of digital retail. And in 6 months, that number went to 115. And we've got probably another 30 with their hands in the air waiting for us to be able to deliver solutions to them, because they know that's where the consumer wants to engage. And I think it's critically important for us as an industry to meet the consumer where they want to be met.
Yeah. So there's a lot there, but I want to touch on just kind of one piece. And you talked early on about kind of we had to pivot as an industry from strategic thinking to execution very quickly. And that's a difficult thing to do. I think a lot of people, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you spend a lot of time planning for that deadline. And then it comes and you've got those plans in place. How did you help to kind of lead your team and the dealer body kind of through that early on?
Thankfully, we had probably 2 to 3 years under our belts of experimenting and partnering with a bunch of different players in the digital retail space. So our integrations were already established. We knew the strengths and the weaknesses of each platform. Toyota was in the background developing their proprietary SmartPath technology. But of the 1,200 Toyota dealers nationwide, they only had it deployed in a handful at the time. So we had experience both from all these third parties out there and the integrations built already. And we were kind of in the wings waiting on Toyota to launch their SmartPath initiative. And it was really just enabling. It was kind of making sure we had the right resources. We allocated more resources to the team. We made sure our technology integration support was ready to go. We accelerated our timelines with SmartPath, and thanks to Toyota for their support in allowing us to accelerate to bring a couple of our dealers online. And it was all hands on deck. At the time, when March hit, at the beginning, every time the phone rang, we didn't know what was going to be on the other end. A lot of times it was dealers, I would say, fighting with their, local municipalities to have, automotive be deemed as a necessary business. People need safe transportation. They need to have their cars repaired, and working alongside them to make sure that could happen in our 5 southeastern states. Then it was Toyota cutting production and making sure dealers understood what that production cut meant. And then I think the last thing was enabling them to be able to be nimble on their feet and launch a digital retail solution that consumers could engage in. And dealers have have proven time and time again that they can adapt to the market and they can adapt quickly. And we have so many success stories of dealers quickly pivoting from showrooms being shut down to being delivering cars, online, picking up vehicles from people's houses to do service. So it was, I would say leading into the pandemic, we were kind of leading the dealers towards digital retail and making sure that they understood what tools were available to them. But once the pandemic hit, we had a bunch of hand raisers that were willing to change their process to meet the consumers. And so I think it was less about what we had to do organizationally or leading it. It was more about making sure we had the resources and the support for our dealers to take advantage of the technology that was in play.
Yeah, it's interesting. Necessity breeds innovation. And I don't think anybody would argue that the dealer body as a whole is a pretty resilient bunch. And if when dealt any kind of hurdles, they figure out a way to either go through it or go get around it, right? And so I think the pandemic certainly is a testament to that. But I think it accelerated the consumer experience. And you mentioned consumers aren't going to go back to wanting to kind of that experience differently. How do you see it kind of playing out in the future? Or what should kind of a dealer be focused on as far as that consumer experience? And more importantly, I guess, how can technology play a role in that in the future?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've seen is you have to meet the consumer where they want to be met. And the consumer doesn't want to have to start over when they go to in-store. As I said earlier, pre-pandemic, like 3% of customers wanted to go end to end. So still, the vast majority of customers expect to have to visit the dealer. But the idea that they start and they spend, I think the average is like 17 hours online, before they get to a purchase decision. They don't want to have to restart all of that work when they get in the store. And so our biggest focus and Toyota's biggest focus with their Smart Path initiative is to allow a consumer to start the transaction online, do the research, evaluate their trade, and then when they come into the store, pick up where they left off online. Not have to come back in and start over from scratch, and being able to have that seamless transition from online to in-store, I think is going to be absolutely critical. The other piece I think is going to be critical is putting the tools in the hands of the consumer. This kind of speaks to the transparency piece that we were talking about earlier, is giving the customer the tools to work through their transaction, to select financing options, to add ancillary products onto it, to see the value in it themselves. And I think that will help the consumer self-select products that make sense for them. And the early indications are that we can still sell a good amount of back-end product with consumer self-selecting. And if that's any indication, it's the value that those products deliver, but it's also the transparency. The consumer fully understands what they're signing up for. I think those are two big pieces to this.
Well, it's interesting. I think transparency breeds trust a little bit with anyone, and by kind of acquiescing to what the customer wants, it's a differentiator when you think about what the experience they may be getting down the street at a competitor, or how that kind of trust translates to overall customer experience throughout the entire transaction, whether it's sales, service, F&I, any of those pieces, which is just interesting to me. I think for me, that's a massive takeaway from how can you give credit to the customer for the work they've already done and make that out of store to in-store experience seamless. So interesting. So I guess maybe pivoting just a little bit, how do you, when you think of how critical innovation is within the automotive industry, how do you kind of foster that environment yourself and potentially across your teams?
Pretty deep question, but a good question. I think it's not necessarily specific to automotive. I think it's any industry. Probably one of the most overused is fail often, fail fast. is giving people the latitude to try new things. I think this industry, we talked about the resiliency of the dealer model, and all of the things that we've had to navigate through. Whether it's the oil crisis back in the 70s and 80s, to the recession in '09 and cash for clunkers, to the onset of the internet and customer experience and transparency. And the dealer model has proven over and over again to be able to innovate to meet the consumers. And I think it's really just a willingness to try new things and empowering your teams to go after things that may not necessarily be successful, and to recognize if it's not going to be successful, pull the plug, don't linger too long, and move on to the next idea. I don't think there's any earth-shattering information that comes from that. But I think, in the end, it's about empowering and really kind of pushing the envelope. We know we've got a tremendous amount of opportunity in this industry right in front of us. And we're going to have to continue to innovate to be able to take advantage of it. One of the things, we talked about before we went live was on this whole, shared autonomous electrification piece. And, if you picked up automotive news, 3 or 4 years ago, it was the death of the dealer model, because no one was going to own cars and everyone was going to share them. Well, guess what? Yeah. The pandemic hits, and who wants to be the last guy in the Uber, after the guy who just left had COVID? I mean, it is completely upended that business. But do we ignore it? No, I don't think we ignore it, because I think, even though the investments that were heading in that space have slowed down, there's still a ton of innovation that comes from it. There's still a lot of benefit that consumers get today from, the whole autonomous vehicle concept. I mean, the Toyota Safety Sense program is built off of a form of autonomy. The shared market is still going to have some traction. Electrification is still going to have some traction. And we have to be ready to support wherever that business goes. I think, one thing that, is non-negotiable here at SET, and certainly at Toyota, is the dealer is the center of everything. The dealers are our partners. And, one thing that makes Toyota successful is our relationships with our dealers. At SET, we've got 177 dealers in our 5 southeastern states, and our success is tied to the dealer's success. And we, as the distributor, have to be out exploring where this innovation is going to happen, so we are ready to support the dealers when they want to take advantage of those things. And so, I kind of look at ourselves as a little bit of an incubator. If you look what we did in digital retail over the last 2 years with all of these partners, it was really to kind of ready our dealers for when Toyota was going to launch SmartPath. They gained experience through the use of these other tools and these other partners, and the proprietary program that Toyota was building was going to encapsulate all of this into one technology suite to allow a really seamless customer transaction. But we were the incubator for our dealers. We presented them options. We gave them multiple tools to choose from to help drive their business and help increase their learning. So when inevitably this solution became available and consumers were asking for the solution, that we were ready to support it. So that's an example of just allowing our team, providing the resources, getting them out there, making some mistakes, and refining the things that worked.
Well, it's interesting. Failing often and failing fast is really kind of a core part of an incubator at the end of the day. And if you think of kind of yourself or your department or your company that you work for, having almost an incubator mindset of, how can I innovate in this particular situation, not be scared of failure, but more importantly, apply those learnings moving forward. It makes a better experience for whatever I'm trying to accomplish on the other end.
Sure, absolutely.
And, actually kind of maybe bringing a bow around this whole conversation, you brought up the importance of the dealer, and, nothing's possible until you sell a car, right? Nothing in the industry, the sale of a car to an end consumer drives everything else from parts, service, all of retail operations. And, I'm certain that that's kind of why you guys get up every day at Southeast Toyota. And, I know you guys do a heck of a job with it. So, but other than that, I think a couple interesting things I really got out of the conversation today, and Brent, I appreciate it more than you know, is the importance of being able to pivot between strategy and setting that kind of strategic thinking to execution and being able to do it quickly. And you do that really through being prepared and having an agile team that is willing to kind of help, right, and help solve problems for the customer. And so, and then I think from a customer or from a dealer experience, it's focus on making that online experience seamless when that consumer gets into the showroom, and the chances are you'll have a more satisfied customer, which translates into more gross, more sales, kind of, and fuels the engine of the dealership. So, Brent, thank you for spending some time with us. I think it's been wonderful, and we appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Nick. Thanks for the time.